Hi, everybody. Mike Terryberry here. I'm a cloud architect at DataBank. I've been with DataBank for a little over 7 years, almost 8 years, actually. And I'm looking at the attendee list and I see a lot of names I recognize. And that's because previously I worked as a solution engineer originally, and then more recently with the team lead of the on-base infrastructure and upgrade teams at DataBank. Um, Yeah, not much more to say. Like I said, I recognize you out here, so I'll pass to Pat, I believe.
Yep.
There we go.
That's right. Hello, everyone. My name is Patrick Higgins. I am the Director in Professional Services of our cloud service offering, something reasonably new here at DataBank, but as you'll see, the team members working on it aren't. I've worked at Hyland for just over 10 years, and I've been at DataBank for just over 9, working on everything from growing our development services, starting up and growing our database services, starting and growing our infrastructure services, and now moving forward with our cloud service offering. Looking forward to taking what we can do for our customers to the next level and give a level of service where you just get to use the application, have the solution work for you, as opposed to the ownership that you may have had in the past. Phil?
Hey everyone, I'm Phil Evans. I'm also a cloud architect here at DataBank. I've been with DataBank for about 4 years now. 2+ years of that have been working with the cloud team, specifically with AWS. Prior to that, I actually used to work for Hyland as well, just like Pat, where I gained a whole lot of on-base knowledge that I'm happy to bring to the cloud team here.
Awesome, thank you guys. I just wanted to pop in here real quickly to talk about our on-base Camp Explorer series that today, obviously, is our cloud webinar day. We have some upcoming events over the next few months. We also have some empowering technical teams in February, automation in March, and content intelligence in April. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to the entire cloud team and let you guys get started. And can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. Thank you.
All right, let's touch on the agenda first for today. This is not a session that's meant to sell you on why you want to go to the cloud. We're really assuming that you've done some research, you're interested in what you can gain from the cloud and what that process looks like of going from classic legacy on-prem, having your own servers, to having an environment that's hosted in the cloud. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today, navigating the landscape, going over how to prepare what the essentials are for a successful migration as you move your system from being on-prem to being in the cloud, what it requires to become ready for that move to the cloud, and then just an open QA format so that if we sparked your interest with anything, if there's questions that you've had and you've wanted to ask, this will be the format to ask them. So navigating the cloud landscape really comes down to knowing what your options are, but also having a strategic plan for your on-base system. Just like if you were to go camping, if you're going on a fishing expedition, hiking, whatever the case may be, you should have a plan. You should know where you're going, how you're going to get there, what the requirements are, what's necessities, and what is the nice to have. And that's really what we want to touch on here today, is moving into the cloud, what that landscape looks like for your options, how to get there, and what are the need to know topics so that you can be as prepared as possible.
All right. So like camping, when it comes to moving to the cloud, we have options, right? So the way we see it here at DataBank is that we kind of have 3 options, the common options for on-base cloud hosting. And those options are Hyland GCS, the DataBank cloud, and then a public cloud. So the public cloud would be like hosting it yourself. So GCS would be like a campground where you're given a designated spot to camp with a specific size tent, and you have specific activities that you're allowed to perform, right? Everything is provided for you as long as it fits within those boundaries. With the DataBank cloud, we let you pick where you'd like to go camping and sort of what you might require for your specific camping trip. But we make sure that we are able to come in first and get that tent set up for you and make sure that everything is the way you kind of want it to look to fit your needs. With a public cloud, you get the ultimate freedom to choose the whens, the wheres, the hows you want to set up in camp. With that freedom, though, you also get the extra responsibility of having to choose, your camping spot, making sure that you brought all the supplies you needed, and making sure that if there are any dangers or problems that arise, that you are responsible for handling those on your own. Mr. Pat, can I get the next slide? Okay, so to strip away that camping metaphor, let's talk about the way we kind of, when we look at a customer, when we're talking to a customer that wants to migrate to the cloud, we kind of see that there are 4 overarching variables that really need considered. And those things are the amount of control you'd like to maintain over your system, how easy it is to administer that system, the amount of work effort needed to get your on-base system into a cloud-hosted environment, and the level of customer support and troubleshooting assistance you may require once your system is in the cloud. Okay, so when we break those down, there are pros and cons to each, right? So here at DataBank, we are obviously fond of the way that we do hosting. However, we know that every on-base system is different. And our goal is mostly to help the customer find which hosting solution actually works best for them. So when it comes to amounts of control, we talked about freedom, right? And how many decisions you want to be able to make. With a public cloud, you get to make all of those decisions. You get to have all of the control. When it comes to GCS, what GCS tends to do is, again, like that campground, it's almost a one size fits all, where they say, hey, this is how we build it, this is what you get, this is how it works. So there's really no extras there. There's no extra control. With the DataBank Cloud, what we try and do is find that happy medium. We try and make sure that what you get is sort of what you need to fit your solution without having to worry about the overhead of maintaining that cloud environment. System administration. A lot of these are going to go hand in hand, right? With public cloud, it's that system administration, you are responsible for all of it. So it's not necessarily easy, only because you have to be willing to take on the full responsibility. When it comes to GCS, again, a lot of that is handled, and there are still parts that you are in charge of. The DataBank Cloud, again, we try and ride that happy medium, where what we want to do is make sure that you can still control your on-base environment and use the integrations you want to use and have that external data or whatever specific solutions your on-base system might use, while also not having to worry so much about the servers and the infrastructure and the architecture. Those migration efforts. With GCS, again, that one-size-fits-all solution, what they're going to do is they're going to say, hey, here's your Unity client, here's your app server address, you are set up, you're done. So there's very little that you are in charge of. With a public cloud, it's the exact opposite. Again, that freedom means you are responsible for handling everything, for making sure that all of those pieces get put into place properly and that everything works. The DataBank Cloud, what we're doing is we're basically saying, okay, here, we will set this up for you. However, those specific solutions you want to maintain, we're going to try and make them work. We're going to try and get those integrations in. We're going to work with you to try and make that happen. So we do need a little bit of your help to make sure that things are functioning the way you expect them to, but we handle a lot of the heavy load on the back end and getting things set up. Customer support. In a public cloud, again, you're responsible for the entirety of the situation. If a problem arises with your cloud solution, you are on the hook for troubleshooting that and figuring it out. If you are ready and willing to accept that responsibility, fantastic. GCS. With GCS, you get access to Highland's support team. You are able to reach out to them and ask questions or get assistance in troubleshooting. However, if you've ever put in an on-base support ticket, you know that sometimes what happens is you get put in front of a tier 1 support person that is going to help you troubleshoot some of the basics that, if you are a little more advanced in technology, you may want to be able to skip that a little bit. And we also know that sometimes there can be a little bit of a wait, right, to get past those initial troubleshooting steps to the root of the issue. The DataBank Cloud, yes, we do have our support team involved. However, we also like to think of it as kind of a concierge service where you have access to the DataBank Cloud team. If we're hosting your environment and you have an issue with the way something is functioning, you can reach out to us directly, and we're more than happy to set up a call and work directly with you to try and get that resolved. With that, I want to pass it over to Mike.
And Phil, I actually have a question that came in that I think is worth just answering before we move on. Question being, who is responsible for backups in these 3 tiers?
Sure. So when we're talking a public cloud, again, all of that responsibility is on you, it's on your IT team, it's on the organization, right? When it comes to GCS and both the DataBank Cloud and GCS, those backups are managed by respectively Hyland and DataBank. So we make sure that all of those backups are in place and that they are being stored and kept securely.
Great. And yeah, and you know, one thing that's kind of something to add on to that as well, when you start looking at the different public clouds, and every public cloud, and the big three being AWS, GCP, and Azure, Microsoft Azure, you know, those would be the big three from public cloud providers. They all have options to make backups easier. And what I mean by that is, you know, AWS has what they call AWS backup, and they have a way to click a button and make that backup vault immutable. But it's still your responsibility at the end of the day to set those up and manage those backups, make sure it's configured properly, and all of those types of things. All right. So, you know, the next part of this is, how do you prepare for going to the cloud? And we actually have a very a long history of actually working on this. Even before the DataBank Cloud existed, we already did work with clients on getting them to their own public cloud and help them get to that point. And what we do is the first step of that is to do the readiness assessment, or what we call the readiness assessment. That assessment is a mixture of a tool that we run, or in many cases in the back end, it's some queries that kind of inspect your database and the configurations that you have in OnBase, as well as some manual processes as well. So we will get in there and run that utility. Now, some of you may already actually have seen this in some ways, and we do it with the upgrades as well. So we have assessment, and it's a very much the same type of utility. In fact, I think we've merged them together at this point to be able to use one utility for both. But the question might be, why do we need to do a readiness assessment? You know, so we are looking for specific things. And I'm going to highlight the ones today that we really pay really close attention to, because we know it causes such a major shift in the way that your OnBase environment is implemented. So if you look at first the clients that the end users are using, you know, for any of you that have had OnBase systems for a really long time, you probably have a lot of end users still using the OnBase Thick client. And OnBase Thick client in both GCS and the DataBank Cloud, you cannot use as an end user client. In the public cloud, it is not recommended to use as an end user client. In fact, we have had clients in the past that have went to their own public cloud, tried to use Thick client, and it has been so slow that they've had to shift and go to a Unity or web client instead. But the end user clients, that's kind of what we're looking for. So if you do have a lot of users that are using Thick client, there's a big preparation step to migrate them over to using one of the core clients, whether that be disconnected scanning or Unity client or web client, as their primary client that they're using. And there's other end user like the Outlook integration that you can use as well, and some of those also. But at the end of the day, it is that Thick / OnBase client that we're really paying close attention to when we do our cloud assessments. And that could be a heavy lift for many of you to switch all of those users off of that. We're also looking at, you know, what from a compliance standpoint, you know, and this is a lot of Q&A that we do as part of our readiness assessments, but what from a standpoint of security and compliance do you as a customer have for how you will connect into that cloud environment? So not every option that we've described has the ability to make secure connections to the cloud. The DataBank Cloud, we do offer a VPN site-to-site. If you're doing your own public cloud, you can do a VPN site-to-site or direct connect as well. But, you know, we're looking to see the different options there to make sure that what you require will fit the option that you pick. And then when talking about hybrid architectures, we are going to start analyzing and asking questions about what else works with the on-base environment. So do you have other third-party systems? And where do those systems exist? What we find a lot today with our clients is that they will want to put on-base up in the cloud. They also have this other environment that's already in an AWS or Azure environment or GCP environment that also works with the on-base environment or interacts with it. But then they also have some servers on-prem, and we have to kind of navigate that to make sure that we're building an architecture that works, across all of those different integrations. So again, as far as the specifics of each of those, you're looking at a VPN site-to-site. So that's really important. For those of you who are not familiar with VPN site-to-sites, it's creating a secure tunnel between wherever these on-base servers are and your office locations. So you may have a lot of clients or a lot of end users that are at home at different office locations, but you may know that, well, all of my actual servers are in this specific location. And I want to make sure that everything that's coming from this location to the cloud goes through a secure tunnel. And generally a VPN site-to-site is the cheapest and easiest option for that because it does create a secure tunnel over the internet. You can go a step further with that. And a step further would be a direct connect where you're not just doing a secure connection over the public internet, but instead you have a dedicated line through a provider to the cloud environment. So that would, generally speaking, is not necessary, but as you grow and scale, those kind of options start becoming more relevant. And then third-party integrations, we talked about this very briefly. Besides Thick Client and looking at if customers are using that, the second most common thing that I look at is how many external data sets and autofills do you have going to other data sources. So many of you will have one or more databases on a third-party application. So maybe you have another line of business application and you need to pull from a customer number, you want to autofill all of that customer's information from that system. Well, the easiest way in OnBase to make that integration is to do a direct SQL query into that other data source. There's a big problem there when you start going to a public cloud, and that is I can't just start making direct SQL calls across the public internet that's not secured. That's a big no-no. Nobody would do it. DataBank Cloud doesn't do it. GCS won't do it. We would not recommend that for the public cloud either. So if you have those types of integrations, we really have to start looking at the different options. You have the option of doing a VPN site-to-site, doing a direct connect. When you do that, you're creating that secure tunnel, and now those database connections across that internet are secure, and you can make those connections directly to that other data source and keep those data sets and autofills as is. There's another option, and specifically if you go to GCS, this is the option you'd have to go with for those. And the other option is to convert all of your autofills and data sets to Unity scripts and then host a public web endpoint on your on-prem servers so that you can make those requests via HTTPS. And now it's a secure communication that allows you to do those autofills and data sets. This may seem like, wow, we don't have that many of those. We've gotten into these assessments and have found 200 plus external autofills and data sets for a single customer. And some of them are to different data sources. And just to give you a kind of an idea of that, those 200 integrations, you would have to create a separate Unity script for every single one of those. Now, the web service that you're hitting on the other end would only have to be created potentially once, but you still have to create a Unity script for each one because what you're actually trying to get for that data is different. So keep that in mind if you're going in and you're doing a readiness assessment, that's going to be something we're going to pay a lot of attention to, because that could start getting expensive to rebuild all of that, or very overburdensome to your team if you would be rewriting those scripts yourself. And the last thing we look at, and we can't grab this via utility, it's something we have to ask you, but do you have any custom applications that you're hosting alongside OnBase? Many people will look at an OnBase environment and they will say, oh, well, this web service over here is part of our OnBase environment. But the reality is that web service that you're referring to, or that portal that you're referring to, is actually custom built, whether that's by you, another third party, DataBank, whoever it happens to be. And because that's custom built and it's your code, or at least you own the rights to that code, that may cause some problems when you start hosting in another environment. You know, public cloud, no problems there. DataBank cloud, I'm going to say we will host custom applications with the caveat that we would have to actually approve it. And GCS, kind of the same answer there. They're a little less willing to host custom applications like that, but there is a process that you could look at trying to get those approved as well. And custom applications, by the way, also incorporates other databases. So many customers will find will have another database in their environment that's not the OnBase database. And that can become a little bit of an issue when hosting as well, because now we're talking about a database that you built, or maybe it's another application uses, and having to manage that database, it can become a little bit problematic for hosting options that are specific to OnBase, because we may not necessarily know all of the ins and outs of the best practices for that particular database. All right, let's go to the next slide. I have a couple of questions in there, but I will wait until after this and I'll answer those before we kind of go to the next piece of this webinar. So successful migration to the cloud. The good thing is this really isn't that much different than migrating it anywhere else. So if I am migrating to all new servers and those are on-prem, and I have to migrate, but every single server is moving, it's pretty much the exact same process. With the caveat is you might have to adjust some things, and getting data from an on-prem to an on-prem server is a lot easier than getting data from an on-prem to a cloud environment, just because you then have to go over the public internet to transfer that data. But generally speaking, the process for doing this migration is we'd first do discovery, and that includes that readiness assessment that I just referenced. So we do the discovery, we create the cloud environment off of that discovery that we did. We migrate your OnBase environment, test, dev, production. Ultimately, we'll end up doing all three of them and having you test all three of them. But we create that cloud environment, and then we record all of the changes that we would make. And this is the same process that you'd want to do if you're doing your own public cloud migration as well. So as you go, you're going to have disk group paths that you're going to have to change. There's going to be configuration items. Maybe you did have to change all of your external autofills and data sets to Unity scripts instead of direct connections. You may have to adjust those. You want to record all of those changes that you make, and then you want to have your end users test. And obviously 3 and 4 are commingled. You would be making these changes while your end users are testing to get to that final product. The reason you have to record all these changes though, is because the only way to cut over at the end of this for a production environment is to re-back up your production database. You would actually first shut off your system. You would back up that production database. You would move that back over to the cloud where you're hosting that database on that side. And then you would have to replay all of the changes that you made during your testing process. Because all of those configurations, as soon as you back up and restore that database, all of those configuration items go back to what they were originally. As part of that, also disk groups, just so you know, if you have a large amount of disk groups, and if you're in the terabyte range, for example, you're probably going to start a production disk group migration on step 2, because that can take a really long time to transfer, or you're going to have an encrypted drive shipped to you that you can load up with all of your disk groups. And then during the cutover, you will just have a delta of your disk groups that you you actually have to copy over at that time of the cutover. So you don't want to get in a situation on a Friday evening that you have to try to figure out how to copy 8 terabytes of disk group data over. You want to get the bulk of that over beforehand, and then just have a small amount between when you originally did the copy and when you actually cut over. All right, next slide. Now, actually, before we get into this, I'm going to look and see if we can answer some of these questions. So we have a question about security and what type of security do each environment have, and that is a question that is hard to answer here. We can probably take this one offline, but I'll answer briefly. First of all, there's no FedRAMP for any of these environments. So if that's something that's a requirement for you, it's not going to be exclusively possible. And the reason is because with a FedRAMP certification, it includes the software itself, not just where you're hosting it, but the software itself. And Hyland has not made the OnBase software FedRAMP certified itself. So there's no way to get there. Now, what we have done for other clients from a FedRAMP standpoint is within AWS specifically, and I won't speak to Azure, but I'm going to assume that they have the same answer as this. You can host everything on FedRAMP certified services. So for example, the VMs in an AWS, which is called EC2, is FedRAMP certified. It's moderate certified in some of their data centers, and FedRAMP High in their GovCloud. So you can get into that. Now, as far as other certifications are concerned, it's a little bit of a part of the process that we go through with each client to determine what their requirements are and determine where they would fit on that. But we can probably answer more specifically offline. Let's see here. So I have a question here that, Phil, you may be able to answer. How does App Enabler work in each of the cloud options if some apps are on-prem or in Azure/AWS?
Sure. So we've actually worked with a customer that is hosted in the cloud that uses App Enabler, and the truth is it can be a little bit tricky, but that only depends on the specifics of how you're using App Enabler. So when it comes to almost any cloud solution, even if you were to host it yourself, what you end up doing is you realize that App Enabler, the way Hyland built it, is not just a server-side thing, but there's a strong client-side element, right, with that App Enabler config file. So the way it tends to work is that in your, if DataBank were to host your solution, we would give you a Unity client click once link that you could install your Unity client with. That Unity client automatically installs Application Enabler. And then basically we would work with you to say, okay, we need to know where that App Enabler config file lives. Where would you like it to live? Is that something that needs a lot of changes all the time and is something you would like to keep in a local network share or a network drive that your users have access to? Because if so, we will set that click once up to basically look for that network location so that that side would be managed by you, just so that you are always in control of your configuration file. But we would basically make all the connections on our end so that all your users would have to do is open up their Unity client and it would automatically connect. Again, because there is that semi on-prem, semi hosted, or rather app side, application layer side parts of App Enabler, that's kind of how it has to work generally, regardless of what hosting solution you go with.
Great, thanks. Pat, I have one for you as well here. How are upgrades handled in the DataBank Cloud? Do we as the customer manage them like today's on-prem solution, or are they auto rolled out and we are always on the latest/greatest?
Perfect. So it's actually an every other year program with the DataBank Cloud. So as we've talked about with the different options that are out there, if you're using the public cloud where you're hosting yourself, where you're managing your own hosting, you're responsible 100% for the upgrade. Certainly DataBank can be brought in and we can assist in those upgrades. We can perform upgrade services for you. But if we're talking about the DataBank cloud, that full service upgrade is part of the DataBank cloud offering. It's actually baked into the hosting contract we have with our customers. But it's not an every year thing. There's a point where upgrades can be a little too frequent. So we do want you to stay current for security reasons, for functionality reasons, for support reasons. But it's an every other year upgrade program that we have in the DataBank cloud, so that every other year you would be going through an upgrade cycle, but we would be in talks with you long before the upgrade ever comes due, so that if there's any kind of upgrade assessment that's required, any kind of upgrade preparation that needs to be performed, there's months to prepare for it. The scheduling of it is something that we would schedule with you and your team, where in GCS, you might have less flexibility of when the upgrade occurs. With the DataBank cloud, we would work with you on scheduling when that upgrade is going to happen to ensure that it doesn't conflict with any other priorities that you may have going on in your organization.
Okay. Thank you. And we'll go through this last slide, and then we'll go back to a couple more questions that we have as well. So I went off script, unfortunately, here. So what does it mean to be cloud ready? And we'll answer that real quick on how we define that from our perspectives. So from my perspective on what would it mean to be cloud ready? You know, going back to that readiness assessment and thinking about what are the results of that assessment. So let's say you do partner with DataBank and you have us do that assessment for you. We're going to have at the end, here's the different options and the things. And part of that, you're going to say, well, I think this option best suits our organization. From that, you're going to have a checklist of items that say, these are the things you need to do. You need to migrate off of the client before you do this migration. Don't try to do it afterwards. You know, make sure that we have all of the development done for however we're going to handle maybe external autofills and data sets and all of those. Let's make sure that's all done prior to this migration so that we're not having to scramble in the end. So from a technical standpoint, that's what I would see be cloud ready. And by cloud ready, I mean specific to on-base cloud ready. So Phil?
Sure. So Mike addresses a lot of like the on-base specific things, right? The clients you're using, the solutions within on-base you're using, but your system is more than just the software, right? You have a team of people that, or maybe it's just one individual, but you have a group that is in charge of making sure that all those pieces work, that they are being administered properly. So I think one of the big things you need to be cloud ready is to truly think about not just your on-base solutions, but what your system does holistically for your organization. Is it sort of a pillar of your entire business, or is it just something used in one small area and your IT staff also has to focus on 6 or 7 other applications, right? So, you know, if you are a small system that is just scan and retrieval and you don't have, or maybe you don't have the IT staff to maintain on-base, you know, maybe that's the type of thing where, okay, GCS is a good fit for you. Or do you have a full staff of cloud trained IT professionals that are ready to tackle and as their day-to-day job administer a cloud environment, in which case maybe you go public, right? So a big part of being cloud ready, at least if you were to ask me, is thinking about your entire system, not just the software, but your staff and how your system is used, where it fits within the organization to determine how it should be hosted, not just, you know, the little technical aspects. Mr. Pat, do you have an answer to that?
So there's one other critical piece that goes into being cloud ready, and that is buy-in in the organization. Just like when you roll out new applications, new solutions, replace one application with another, there can be changes when moving to the cloud. It's pretty critical to make sure that everyone in the organization that would either be using the application or responsible for any of the back end of the application be involved, be bought in. For instance, depending on what your business is, even if the on-base solution is hosted in the DataBank cloud or in GCS, you very likely have security officers that need to have very specific questions asked and answered about the security of the system. If you are in the government space, are you housing any criminal justice information, and is the system prepared for that? Are you housing any tax information? Is the system prepared for that? If you're on the healthcare side, is there HIPAA content, and is the system prepared for that? You want to make sure that the security resources are involved, any auditors that you have, that they're aware, prepared, and part of this, as well as the end user community, making sure that the users that are going to use the system are aware of this change. They're part of the user acceptance testing. But for the DataBank Cloud specifically, when we migrate a customer from on-prem to the cloud, before we go live, we perform user acceptance testing where we want subsets of your users, ideally power users, actually ideally the noisiest users, the users that tend to make the biggest think about anything. We want them to be performing that user acceptance testing before we go live, so that we have every opportunity to address any concerns ahead of time. But that user community should be aware weeks and months in advance of this change happening, so that community buy-in, that user community buy-in within your organization is critical to being cloud ready.
All right. I have a couple more questions here now. So first one I'm going to look at here is, how are you managing the various stages with the client, starting with initial planning / assessment, and what method or tool are you using? Pat, do you want to maybe take that question?
Sure. So let's talk about the process and tools. And Mike had touched on this a little bit with the cloud readiness assessment. DataBank at large, and really the group that you're hearing from today, is part of our infrastructure services team as well as our upgrade team. We created these things here at DataBank, and as part of that, we have gone into on-prem systems more times than I care to count to help customers know what their current system state is. How is the foundation built? Is it healthy? Is it ready to scale? Is it ready for growth? Are there performance issues? And is it ready to upgrade? Well, we like to automate things here at DataBank. We're a solution provider. We like to make solutions for ourselves too. So we've made utilities that do a fair amount of that assessment for us. Think of it as being an automated checklist to make sure that we don't miss anything. That's a big first step of that preparation, to look at the system, make sure that we've covered everything. And then we assess the results of that utility. Some of it's green light, red light responses. Some of it is simply gathering data, and we have to look at it, as Mike and Phil have both touched on. Are there VB scripts? Are there external autofill keyword sets? What is the crux of those? Maybe even having conversations with you to see, are they still in use? It's oftentimes in an on-base system, you'll build something and then years later it's no longer needed, but it hasn't been removed. It's good to catch that stuff, and we do that as part of that initial assessment.
Great. Next one, and this one I'll shoot to you, Phil. What are the biggest advantages of Azure / AWS / other cloud providers compared to the Hyland Cloud for a customer using external autofills and other customizations?
Sure. So one of the big sort of, again, we love Hyland, but one of the big complaints some customers have about GCS is how sort of one size fits all it can be. When we're talking about pulling data from an external database or another data source, or if it is hosting a custom portal, these are things Hyland won't do. These are things that to fit that one size fits all sort of, here is your camping spot, that's not something they will traditionally do for you. When you're talking about either hosting with us or even having your own public cloud, those are things you are absolutely capable of doing. But again, if it's public, it is something you have to make sure you are setting up and securing properly. And if it's with us, it is then just, again, there's that little bit of having to work with us to make sure you're receiving the data that you are expecting and that it is set up in a way that you are able to utilize it and update it.
Great. Next one, and I'll take this one. What differences will the user notice or need to know once going to the cloud? So again, some of this would come as part of the readiness. So we talked about having to move off the client that's a very obvious example. But the one thing that I do have to mention and people need to be aware of is that if I have a server sitting right next to me and I have a server in the cloud, that server right next to me is going to respond, assuming it's all the resources are appropriate on it. It's going to respond faster than a server sitting in the cloud. And I don't mean this to say that it's going to be slow in the cloud, because many of the reasons why we're not using thick client is because that client is not built for WAN type environments or something where you have a cloud environment. It just does not perform well. But even then, let's say that we have an autofill or a data set that's pulling from an external database that's on-prem. That may have some slight delay in the cloud environment as compared to the servers if they're sitting right next to us interacting with each other. What you'll find though with that is that as you're going, as times go along here, that delay has become smaller and smaller and smaller. So instead of, it's not like you're going to do an autofill and wait for 3 seconds for it to pull that autofill compared to instantaneously online. It might be a half a second instead of no delay at all. But it's worth mentioning that because I've worked with end users at at other companies even before DataBank for 10 plus years. And when they do certain things and it starts being slightly delayed, they complain. And they start saying this is really slow. I think setting that expectation up front that there is going to be some functionality that may take a little bit longer. It's not going to, we'll look into it if it's something that is extreme, but we have to realize what we're working with and the parameters that we have within here. So, that's one of the negatives of going to the cloud is there is that small delay, but there's so many other positives that make up for that.
It is worth noting, though, that in some instances, what we've seen is customers that are ready to migrate to the cloud are on aging hardware. Mm-hmm. So they might have the fewest network hops possible, but they have slow running servers. When we move them to the cloud, they're on faster servers, but there's more network hops, and it could wind up being the same performance. It really comes down to what you have today and what you're going to be moving to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's not a perfect example, but it's definitely something worth noting. And we've, especially with customers moving to their own cloud, a lot of times they'll take it and just think, hey, I can just lift and shift all of these servers to the cloud and just use it just like I did before. And that's just not the case. There's certain optimizations you need to do to make any of that impact as minimal as possible. All right. I'm gonna ask a question here that many people ask us, and I want to kind of get Phil's perspective on this. Should we upgrade at the same time we're migrating to the cloud?
So that can be a tricky one, only because there are some cases where you might have to, right? If you are on an older version of OnBase, we would absolutely recommend that you get up to one of the more secure foundation builds as part of your migration. So in that scenario, yes, we would want to see you upgrade as you migrate. However, if you just upgraded last year and you are on a healthy version, one that is secure, we might not recommend it at the same time, simply because, like anything, when you're making a big change to the system, we want to minimize those variables. Where if we don't need to upgrade right now, let's migrate first. And if there are any kinks, we can work those out. And we don't know, and then we know that they aren't attributed to an upgrade as we're on top of that migration.
Great. I have another question here. And I can take this one. In regard to losing the OnBase thick client, has the user functionality no longer available been identified? And with admin items, have workarounds been identified? So most, kind of to answer the first question, most of the functionality that the thick client has from an end user's perspective is available in the Unity client or web client. So generally speaking, let's say you do high volume scanning. You also have disconnected scanning clients. They've started building, because Hyland has GCS and they have to deal with these same limitations. They have built those clients to handle that functionality. As far as the administration, that's a good question, because in the case of a thick client or even on-base config, they are direct database connections. And again, we talked about that earlier, you don't want to make those across the internet. So Highland has used, and I think they believe they still use Citrix published applications. So you go into a web portal, you click on the application you want to launch, whether that's thick or config, it opens that up as a part of a public application, and then that is actually being launched on their side, so that connection to that database is secure, because it's not, you're not the one from your workstation connecting that database. At the DataBank Cloud, we do a very similar process. We just use an AWS service called AppStream, and it's very similar. It publishes those applications in that way. When you go to the your own public cloud, if you would choose to have let's say a direct connect, in theory, assuming that your security team says this is okay, you could connect a thick or config for configuration purposes right on your workstation and have that traffic go through. Because when you're doing config and thick, if you have a little delay in how that functions, it's probably not the end of the world, because you're doing administration. It's when you get to the end users that you really see that big impact. So hopefully that answers that question. All right. And I think, Addie, we're about at the end of time here. I didn't know if we had a couple other slides we wanted to go through before we wrap it up.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. That was more knowledge than I was expecting, and I just really appreciate it. I think I learned a few things as well. So yeah, Pat, you can go to the next slide. So thank you guys for attending. As far as because you all attended, we wanted to give you a thank you. Part of that is a complimentary cloud readiness assessment with the lovely DataBank Cloud team. You'll be receiving an email with a form to fill out, or you guys can also contact your DataBank rep about that should you want to utilize the assessment. And as well, I also wanted to let you guys know that the next webinar is going to be regarding empowering, enabling technical teams for success. That is Wednesday, February 15th at 11 a.m. Eastern time. And with that, I can officially call this On-Base Camp Cloud webinar series complete. So thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will see you guys at the next one. Thank you.